Welcome to Scriptural Snapshots, brought to you by Living Faith Ministries in Kaiser, West Virginia, where we bring the living Word of God into your life. I'm Pastor Gordon Brubaker. We're talking about our prayer time from May the 27th of 2025 and how God is dealing, and He's bringing all these different times of prayer, and I put it under the title, A Day of Vengeance. What God is doing, what God is speaking to us, is the revelation of what He is doing in the earth right now. And we're talking about Mark 8:15, where Jesus charged them and said, take His disciples, saying, "Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." In Luke 12:1, Jesus says, "Beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy." Oh, isn't that amazing? It's hypocrisy. It is to say something that you don't believe to convince other people that you believe it, that you're on their side. Oh man, there's so many examples of this. I'll just go on. What is leaven? The leaven of hypocrisy spreads throughout the entire loaf. If there's a little bit of leaven, if it's not checked, it'll go through the entire loaf. You know, Dad always told a story about a lady. I assume this is true, but he told a story of a woman that she was making bread. This back in the olden days when you made your own bread, and she made the bread and she put leaven in when she put too much in, and it began to grow and grow and grow. And she let it sit for too long of a time, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. Leaven, yeast, is a living organism, and it makes bread rise. Bread will not rise without leaven. Well, she put too much in. And the way when you bake the bread stops rising. It'll rise to a certain level until the heat kills all the leaven bacteria that's in the bread that causes it to rise. And it also gives it flavor. So she made too much, and she baked her loaves, and she still had leaven or had bread left, and it's still just growing and increasing because it'll just keep growing. So she took it out of the yard and buried it in different places in the yard. And after another day or day and a half, the leaven, what she buried, was all coming up through the ground because it just kept growing. And see, leaven, if it's not done right, it can destroy things. And Jesus says the leaven, because he's not against all leaven. Understand this. He's not against all leaven, but he says the leaven of the Pharisees is hypocrisy. In other words, they're sowing things, they're telling, well, I'll say it like this. Jesus said, do what the Pharisees tell you to do, but don't do what they practice. Because he says they teach the word of God, but they don't obey it. They don't apply it to themselves. And this is the leaven of hypocrisy. I'm going to tell you how you ought to live, but it doesn't apply to me. Laws for you, but not for me. Oh, this is a leaven that we see so many times. I see non-Christians. Well, as Christians, you ought to live this way. Well, wait a minute. You're not a Christian. So who are you to tell me how I ought to live? Because you're going to twist the word of God because you're not doing it for my own benefit because you don't live that way. If you really believe what you're telling me is beneficial, then you would live that way, but you don't live by the word of God. You hold me to a higher standard than you hold yourself to. And I'll tell you, Jesus holds me to an even higher standard than what they do, but we let the world dictate to us how they think we ought to live, but they never apply it to themselves. That is hypocrisy, and that is the leaven that they sow. They teach against bullying, and yet they are the bullies. They teach everyone has a right to express their opinion except the people that they don't agree with. It's leaven, it's hypocrisy that they tell you how you ought to live, but it doesn't apply to them. That is the height of hypocrisy. Well, leaven is like a cactus spine, one person said, that is deep under the skin, and until it is pulled out, it will fester and swell with poison. And if you've ever had a cactus thorn in you, there's a little hook on it, and it hurts to pull it out, and sometimes those spines are so small, so thin, they're almost invisible. And sometimes if you've ever stuck yourself with cactus, you get those spines in you and you think you've got all of them, but there's still just a spot, and you've pulled the top of it off, but the spine is still in the skin, and it festers and it festers, and it gets sore and sore. That's how bad leaven is. That's how hypocrisy is it will hurt you even though you can't see it. That's why you've got to be careful of any hypocrisy in your life. That's why Jesus said, if you're my disciples, you will abide in my word. And if you abide in my word, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Because truth is the only cure to hypocrisy. I'm Pastor Gordon Brubaker. God bless you.